All right, so I'll just start by saying that category creation doesn't always need to be it doesn't need to lead to like generational shifts in technology, culture, or routine. However, I do think that if those are your goals to have such a massive impact on like how people live and operate, then category creation is probably the best strategy for you to pursue. And I know we try to be diverse with our picks on this podcast and, add startups in here as often as possible. But I needed to go big for this one. And I couldn't think of a bigger category creation example that's really impacted me personally than Netflix. And before we talk about Netflix, let's talk about the biggest loser in Netflix's story, which is Blockbuster, right? And to do that, I'm going to take you all the way back, to the early 2000s. I'm a 90s baby. And so I was in elementary school at this time. And every couple of weeks, I'd join my dad to a trip to Blockbuster, to pick up a couple movies to watch over the weekend.
Good times.
And this is a magical memory, by the way. Usually plan out what we wanted to rent a couple days in advance. I'd have to get there early on Friday. Otherwise, the movie might be sold out. I could usually only pick one movie, right, for budgetary reasons. And then I had to watch it quickly, or else we'd get charged a late fee when we went to return it. And that was my experience for years. And I know it was also millions of other people's experience too, because in 2004, Blockbuster had a whopping 9,000 stores open globally and was earning a massive $5.9 billion in revenue.
That's wild.
Now, yeah. They were a big business. And if you had told me that by 2005, they would lose 75% of their market value, I probably would have looked at you and said, what's market value? Because I was 11 at the time. But if you would have instead told me that Blockbuster would be obsolete in just a couple of years and that I was, it was mostly because of a company called Netflix, I would have been mind blown. Because around this time, Netflix had really just created the DVDs by mail category. And it was about 10% of the size of Blockbuster. But they were growing really quickly. This DVDs by mail category was what initially started to hurt Blockbuster. They didn't charge late fees. Your favorite movies were always in stock. They gave you a personalized list of recommendations. And they charged a subscription fee rather than a cost per movie. And as you all know, they continue to grow. By 2007, Netflix revenue doubled over the past couple of years. Blockbusters was stagnating. And that's the end of the story, right? Wrong. What happens next is why Netflix is my choice, because when everyone least expected it, Netflix put the final nail in Blockbuster's coffin by launching another new category, and the one that they'd ultimately be most known for, which is streaming. That's right. You didn't even have to use DVDs to watch movies or TV shows anymore. You could just watch them on Netflix's app. This took things to an entirely new level, much beyond Blockbuster. We all know how that story ended, but with streaming, American culture shifted. How? Let me count the ways. Number one, with streaming, we got the concept of binge watching, or the ability to sit down and watch seemingly endless amounts of content. We got the cord cutting movement, which led to a massive wave of people canceling their cable subscriptions in favor of streaming platforms. And we even got phrases like Netflix and chill, which means, well, we won't get into that. But in either case, you get where I'm going with this. When Netflix launched the streaming category, they changed everything. Remember the 4 million subscribers that I mentioned them having in 2007? Guess how many subscribers they have, Jason, tomorrow? Guess.
Today? Oh,
50 million.
gosh. I think more like 500 million.
Okay, so today they have nearly 270 million subscribers, and their business is worth $250 billion, all thanks to category creation. And I'll end my segment with one of my favorite elements of this story. And that is, streaming was always a part of Netflix's mission, hence their name, Netflix. But they had to wait for the timing to be right before they released it. And I think that is such a baller move to essentially have your category that you're disrupting be in the name of your company. It was there for literally everyone to see it for a decade, but absolutely nobody understood the level of impact that it would have on our lives. And so that's my spiel on Netflix and why I think that they had the best category creation launch.
Nice one. I'd love the last point you made, how it's like you knew it, and it was very clear they wanted to get to streaming, but they had the middle, which was by mail, which was like a completely new category in itself that they created as a stepping stone to get there, which was, it's just a very cool, it's cool. It's cool to think about because at the time, I think for most people, they probably didn't have the internet to do streaming well or cheaply. And so, I do think a lot of times there are categories that come around that just come too early and it's not possible for them to take hold and it's just not the right timing. And so that is an interesting thing with category creation. In some cases, timing is really important. And they had the foresight to just wait a little bit while still building a successful business, which is cool.
Yeah, I love it. It's like we talked at the beginning of the show about how category creation is like a 10-year investment, right? And we kind of pulled that number out of nowhere, but also there's been a lot of studies that it is around 10 years, I think. And this is such a good example of that, Andy. And it's interesting to think about. It's not just, okay, we have the same message, we keep pushing for 10 years, and then finally we break through and it's worth it. It's more like, what are the time horizons we need to be considering in that 10-year, decade? And so when I think about time horizons, I'm always like, okay, short term, next 12 months, midterm, 1 to 3, say 1 to 5 years. And then long term, 5 years and beyond. And like, what's the product and narrative and go-to-market strategy of each of those time horizons that are going to get you to where you want to go in the future? And I think that this was a really great example of that, where Netflix is basically saying our first time horizon, like our first milestone we need to hit, is actually not the end goal, but it's a critical milestone along the way, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it's really I wish that I actually pulled a list of companies that didn't quite make it, but like had the right idea, but were just too early, because I feel like that's happened for a lot of categories. Like, like with Facebook, I think that they probably, like, I associate them as being like the de facto social media platform, even though, before we had like MySpace, we had Pixo, we had all these like iterations, but like, to be honest, like Facebook came along at the right time. They had the right execution. And so people just naturally kind of associate them with that category. And I think that's another thing that people might get confused a little bit about, like when it comes to category creation. I don't think that it's necessarily like the first company that comes along like with the idea. It's the first company that comes along like with an idea and is able to get like mass adoption and is able to execute it in the right way. I think Google is another example with like as being like the de facto search engine. You know what I mean? Like they really nailed it. They got mass adoption. They weren't the first ones to like release a search engine, but like I would say that they predominantly like made the category what it is today.
Yeah, a good example of that would be the company, is it Jabra or Yeah, I think it's Jabra. They make they are actually the category creators of the fitness bracelet, the wireless speaker, and like wireless earbuds, I think.
Yeah.
And they're not the category like king or owner of the category of any of them. So they were the first to create it, but they're not the one who actually owned the category, which is interesting. And I think to your point about like, is there one out there now or an example of one that might be too early, for example? I wonder if it's things like AI Pin or Rabbit.
Oh, 100%.
AI and the ability to have like a handheld device, and I just don't think it's there yet. And so I do wonder, I think it'll eventually get somewhere, but I wonder if they'll be the ones who actually own that category.
Absolutely. Good points.
Great example, Andy, and has impacted all of us.